All right, everyone, it's time for the Occult video 430, the juxtaposition of paganism in Christendom. Interesting topic. It's spurred on by actually an article that was talking about a grave site in Poland. This is from the medieval era, and it shows trappings of both paganism and Christianity. Burial rites associated with the former, structure generally associated with the latter, but it represents, it seems, and of course they're going to do obviously more studies, to represent a sort of period between the more pagan era and the more Christian era as far as ritualism goes. When I read this, I was fascinated. It's fascinating archaeological news. Link in the description, of course, archive. Um, because this is the case with religion in general. I wanted to show you something in case you hadn't seen it. This is the Book of Common Prayer. It was issued by the Episcopalian Church. This is a 70s edition that my grandfather owned, actually. He was a marginal Christian, but he was also a pagan and into folklore and magic and things like that. He liked UFOs and lake monsters and stuff. Great work, Lake Monster Traditions, Claude Gagnon. He was very, very interested in these. For some reason, he had like 5 books just about bark canoes. I've still got them. He's got the whole collection, I suppose. Interesting man. But one thing that I learned is that there's basically 2 forms of Christendom, right? The first is highly ritualistic. This is the high church methodology. This is the low church methodology. So this is for Christians that are more civic, more community oriented and things like that. The ritualists went off in the other direction and are effectively, it's just the diaspora of the Catholic Church with stained glass and robes and miters and stuff like that. It's a little bit different. It's more stringent. The prayers are more stringent and so forth. Back hundreds of years ago, the New World Low Churcher movement, mainly they read from this, the Book of Common Prayer. They read less of the Bible than they did effectively what amounts to an extended version of Psalms more than anything else. They would consult the Bible, of course, and they would have had one in their home and been aware of it and everything, assuming they were literate. But church was just as much a picnic function as it was a worship function under that civic tradition. This also harkens back to paganism more than anything else. This particular remain in Poland is just one of a number of examples. The High Church adopted much of its ritualism from what had been pagan trappings in Rome. That's why the symbolism blends together with it. That's why the architecture, in some early cases, blends together with it. You get that influence. And of course, assuming that you believe that Jesus Christ was a real person, I happen to believe that somebody of that particular caliber did exist, then this individual clearly had mystic understanding. It's a little bit different from the ritualistic side. It was more communal, not communistic, but communal, almost civic in nature, but pseudo-civic, if that makes any sense. Because the early Christians, Jesus having been an Essene, we know that at this point, it's pretty much beyond debate, basically exempted themselves from polite society because he didn't give a shit about polite society. Why would you? There was no such thing back in the ancient Roman times. They were still throwing people to lions for a form of entertainment. Not that I'm against this, but it's not I mean, it's brutal. It's not exactly a decadent society in that particular sense. Paganism, though, influenced Christianity greatly. And Christianity, in turn, influenced paganism. This is something that I've tried to explain to some other pagans. Mainly, they don't get it. A lot of them tend to be more like hardcore. And it's really more they're into like, I guess, like death metal and stuff like that, and epic and stuff like that. And they want to carry an axe around. So they think that that makes them a Viking, I suppose. I've noticed this about certain groups of people. Some pagans are more on the intellectual side, like myself, and some are pretty much LARPing, let's face it. There's a lot of Deus vaulting Christians that do the same thing, and a lot of people in Islam and Judaism and all of these others that do the same as well. This happens in every religion and spiritual sense, so it is unavoidable. Christianity also influenced what became, well, what we would now term generally neo-paganism, which is that the moral values that are applied to the pagan system are retroactive and they're built on Judeo-Christianity more than anything else. And some pagans will get angry if you tell them this. Hey, you say that you're a pagan, but your ethical standards really they sound an awful lot like you're going to church every week. Oh, no, it's not. Yes, it is. Quite literally, the two juxtaposed together, they influenced one another. So when really, really religious Christians, for example, they say that they don't celebrate, Christmas or something like that because it's unlawful. They think that, well, I mean, December 25th wouldn't have been when Jesus was born. Anyway, it probably would have been sometime in April or May given the description in the Bible itself. But they think that it's a sin to actually celebrate in that manner. Technically speaking, they're correct because the way that Christmas is typically celebrated is mostly pagan. Likewise, Christian ethics, have seeped their way into modern paganism. There are exceptions, but I noticed that a lot of the exceptions are people who simply invert the system. So they become like black magic practicing terrorists or something like that, and believe this to be helpful to the world. Yeah, I'm to be clear, I've never been a member of any such group. And then you have the inversion, the symbolic inversion, of course, with Satanism, atheistic Satanism, that is, of course, which really is nothing more than Catholic ritualism turned on its head. But it's based on that ritualism now, isn't it? It's certainly not a pagan system. It's not an occult system. They don't even claim it to be either. It's really nothing more than atheism with a theater show. And so you have this interchange between paganism and Christianity and a lot of other blending too. You look at some of the more New Age Christians, for example. There's a hefty bit of Hinduism, Buddhism, and old school occultism that's blended with that. So they believe in Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior, and they lead a Christian life. It's based partially on Judeo-Christian ethics and modern civic ethics. They tend to melt together pretty well. But then there are also elements of other religious and spiritual paths that are all blended together into a slurry. It almost doesn't matter what you label some of these religious groups because you could call them Christian, you could call them Hindu, you could call them Islamic, you could call them anything under the sun, and it would still technically be appropriate for part of the core of that religious movement. When we see, therefore, burials like this, and there's more than one, it represents that timeline in which Christianity was attempting to absorb the pagans, convert them, and in some cases that led them to adopt pagan rituals. They simply Christianized them. Pagans, meanwhile, sought to maintain their subculture, their spiritual movement, so they ingrained it, injected it into Christendom, and they kept the folklore, and they kept things like that, but then they were at least nominally Christian. My grandfather, again, great example. He had a couple of ash trees, mountain ashes, growing out in front of the house. This is an old Irish and Welsh Scots tradition, and I believe in Scandinavia as well. The idea is that the ash tree is sacred to Thor, and so it wards off lightning. This is pure pagan folklore. Dude's a Christian. He's engaging in behavior that is purely folkloric. It has nothing to do with Christendom. Jesus never said, hey, by the way, those trees with the red berries, should plant a couple of them out in front of your hut because, then I won't have my dad strike you with lightning. That never happened. It is a pagan tradition. Christmas, mostly pagan. From the tree to everything else. A lot of drug references, too. Easter, or Ostara, the moving festival. Quite clearly, what happened on Easter 2,000 years ago was on one specific date, not on a date determined by where the moon happens to be in the sky, or what phase it happens to be in. Well, you've got that. It happens over and over. By the way, I have no problem with this. Personally, I think that it's a good thing. The blending of these different spiritual traditions has made all sorts of fun holidays and things like that, where people hopefully can be charitable, get together with family, and eat a lot of food. Eating a lot of food holidays are always my favorite. Can't wait for Thanksgiving. That's about all. Peace out.